"I'm afraid of you," she whispered. The cowboy stepped back and said, "Then I'll earn it." The gunshot tore through the evening air before Emma could scream. She pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the general store, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. 3 men on horseback circled the town square, their revolvers pointed at anyone who dared to move. The tallest, one, a man with a scar running down his cheek, fired another shot into the air. Emma had only been in Dust Creek for 2 weeks, running from a past that refused to stay buried. She clutched the small leather satchel against her chest, the one containing every dollar she had managed to save. Her hands trembled as dust kicked up from the horse's hooves, coating everything in a fine brown powder. That's when she saw him. A cowboy stepped out from the shadows between 2 buildings, his hand resting easy on the gun at his hip. He wore a dark hat pulled low, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and the calm way he carried himself. He didn't rush, he didn't shout. He just walked forward like he had all the time in the world. The scarred man turned his horse, pointing his weapon at the cowboy. Emma wanted to shout a warning, but her throat had gone dry. The cowboy stopped about 20 feet from the riders, his boots settling into the dirt with quiet confidence. "You boys are making a lot of noise for nothing," the cowboy said. His voice was low and steady, the kind that didn't need to be raised to be heard. The scarred man laughed, a harsh sound that made Emma's skin crawl. "We're making noise because we can, stranger. This town belongs to whoever's holding the guns, and right now that's us." The cowboy tilted his head slightly. "I count 3 of you and about 50 people watching. Those aren't good odds, friend." "Seems like 3 guns against 1 is pretty good odds to me," the scarred man said. His companions shifted in their saddles, their fingers tightening on their triggers. Emma saw the cowboy's hand move so fast it was like watching lightning strike. His revolver cleared the holster and fired 3 times before she could blink. The guns flew from the bandits' hands, clattering to the ground. Not one of them had been hit, but they all sat frozen, staring at their empty hands. "Now the odds are different," the cowboy said. He hadn't moved from his spot, and his voice remained calm. "You can ride out of here right now, or you can try your luck on foot." The 3 men exchanged glances. The scarred man's face had gone pale beneath the dirt and stubble. Without a word, they wheeled their horses around and galloped out of town, leaving their weapons lying in the dust. The townspeople erupted in cheers and shouts of relief, but Emma couldn't move. She watched as the cowboy holstered his weapon and turned, his eyes scanning the crowd. When his gaze landed on her, she felt something shift in her chest. He started walking toward her, and every instinct screamed at her to run. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see his eyes were the color of storm clouds.
"You hurt?"
he asked. Emma shook her head, still unable to find her voice. "Name's Jake Porter," he said, touching the brim of his hat.
"You're new in town."
It wasn't a question. Emma swallowed hard. 2 weeks, she managed to say. Jake nodded slowly. "Rough welcome." He glanced at the satchel she still clutched. "You planning to stay?" Emma looked past him at the road leading out of town, then back at his weathered face. She had run so far already. "Maybe it was time to stop. I don't know," she said honestly. Jake studied her for a long moment, then gave a slight smile. "Well, if you do decide to stay, Dust Creek's got a decent diner. Coffee's not half bad." He tipped his hat again and turned to walk away. Emma watched him go, something stirring inside her that felt dangerously close to hope. She had spent the last 3 months looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, trusting no one. But there was something about the way Jake Porter had handled those men, something about the calm certainty in his voice that made her want to believe this dusty little town might actually be safe. She was wrong, of course. Safety was an illusion, and her past was already on its way to shatter it. 3 days after the incident in the town square, Emma found herself working at the diner Jake had mentioned. The owner, a kind woman named Betty, had hired her on the spot when Emma had walked in looking for work. The pay wasn't much, but it came with a room upstairs and 2 meals a day. For someone who had been sleeping in barns and abandoned cabins, it felt like luxury. Jake came in every morning at 6 o'clock sharp. He always sat at the corner table with his back to the wall, always ordered the same thing: eggs, bacon, toast, and black coffee. He was polite, tipped well, and never stayed longer than necessary. Emma found herself watching for him, her stomach doing strange flips when she heard his boots on the wooden floor. On the 4th morning, she finally worked up the courage to talk to him beyond taking his order. She set his coffee down and lingered by the table, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the other day. I never got to say it." Jake looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. "Just doing what needed doing," he said. Emma nodded, starting to turn away, but his next words stopped her. "You're scared of something." It wasn't a question, and the directness of it made Emma's breath catch. She glanced around the diner, but the only other customer was old Henry, half asleep in his usual booth. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but the lie felt heavy on her tongue. Jake folded his newspaper carefully, his movements deliberate. "I've seen a lot of people running from things, Miss Emma. You got that same look, like you're waiting for something bad to catch up." Emma's hand tightened on the coffee pot. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You're right," Jake said. He picked up his coffee cup and took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I know you near jumped out of your skin yesterday when that wagon backfired. I know you always stand where you can see both doors, and I know you keep that satchel of yours close even when you're working." Emma felt heat rising in her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and something else she couldn't quite name. "Maybe I'm just careful," she said. "Maybe," Jake agreed. "Or maybe you're running from something that scares you more than those bandits scared you." He set his cup down gently. "Either way, it's your business. But if trouble comes looking for you here, it becomes this town's business, and I make it my business to keep this town safe." Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him everything. About Charlie Bridger, the man she'd been engaged to back in Silver Ridge, about how she discovered he wasn't a successful merchant like he'd claimed, but a killer who worked for the worst kind of men. About how she'd found the wanted posters hidden in his office, how she'd confronted him, and how he'd smiled that cold smile and told her she knew too much to walk away. She'd run that very night, taking only what she could carry. She'd been running for 3 months, always looking over her shoulder, always knowing that Charlie had connections everywhere, men who could track a ghost if he paid them enough. Men who wouldn't hesitate to make sure she never told anyone what she knew. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she just nodded stiffly and walked away, feeling Jake's eyes on her back. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Emma served eggs and poured coffee and smiled at customers until her face hurt. When her shift ended at noon, she went upstairs to her room and sat on the narrow bed, staring at the wall. She had been foolish to think she could stop running. Charlie would find her eventually. He always found people who crossed him. The smart thing would be to pack her bag and leave tonight, get as far from Dust Creek as possible before her presence brought trouble down on these kind people who had given her a chance. A knock on the door made her jump. Emma's hand went instinctively to the small knife she kept in her boot. "Who is it?" she called. "Betty," came the reply. "You got a visitor downstairs, honey." Emma's blood ran cold. A visitor. It was too soon. She wasn't ready. Her mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it wasn't Charlie. Maybe it was just someone asking directions. Maybe she was panicking over nothing. She forced herself to stand, to smooth down her dress, to walk to the door on legs that felt like they might give out. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw Jake standing by the front window, his hat in his hands. Relief flooded through her so strongly she had to grab the banister to steady herself. Jake turned at the sound of her footsteps, and his expression told her he'd noticed her reaction. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. "I wanted to apologize for this morning. I was out of line asking questions that weren't mine to ask." Emma shook her head, descending the last few steps. "No, you were right. I am running from something. Someone." She took a deep breath, making a decision that terrified her. "His name is Charlie Bridger. He's dangerous. And if he finds me here, people could get hurt. I should leave before that happens." Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he said something that surprised her. "Tell me about him." So she did. Standing there in the empty diner with afternoon sunlight slanting through the windows, Emma told Jake everything. About Charlie's lies, about the wanted posters, about the men he worked for, the Carlton Gang, a group of killers and thieves who had been terrorizing towns across 3 territories, about how Charlie had laughed when she'd tried to leave, how he'd told her she belonged to him now, how he'd promised that if she ran, he'd find her and make sure she regretted it. When she finished, her hands were shaking. Jake had listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. Now he set his hat on a nearby table and crossed his arms. "This is Charlie Bridger," Jake said. "You got any idea if he's tracking you?" Emma nodded miserably. "He has resources. Men who do this for a living. It's only a matter of time." "How much time, you figure?" Emma looked out the window at the quiet street, at the town that had started to feel like it might be home. "I don't know. Could be days. Could be weeks. But he'll come." Jake was quiet again, and Emma braced herself for what she knew was coming. He would tell her she had to leave. That he couldn't risk the town for one person. That she'd brought this on herself. She'd heard it all before, in the last town she'd tried to settle in. The sheriff there had given her 24 hours to disappear. But Jake surprised her again. "Then we'll be ready when he does," he said simply. Emma's head snapped up. "What?" Jake met her eyes steadily. "You didn't ask for this trouble. You tried to do the right thing, and now you're paying for it. I'm not going to tell you to keep running. If you want to stay in Dust Creek, then you stay. And if this Bridger shows up, he'll find it's not as easy as he thinks." Emma felt tears pricking at her eyes. "You don't understand. Charlie doesn't come alone. He'll bring men with him. Good men could die." "Then I'll make sure that doesn't happen," Jake said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I've dealt with worse than the Carlton gang. And Emma, if you're tired of running, then it's time to stand." Emma wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it hurt. But fear had been her constant companion for so long that she didn't know how to let it go. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she whispered. Jake picked up his hat, settling it back on his head. "Then I'll be strong enough for both of us," he said. "Until you find your own strength." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You're safe here, Emma. I give you my word on that." After he left, Emma stood alone in the diner for a long time. Through the window, she could see Jake walking down the street, stopping to talk to the sheriff, then heading toward the general store. He was already preparing, she realized. Already making plans to protect her, to protect the town, even though he barely knew her. For the first time in months, Emma felt something other than fear. It was small and fragile, but it was there. Hope. The next week passed in a strange kind of tension. Emma continued working at the diner, but now she noticed things she hadn't before. The way the sheriff started making more frequent rounds. The way several men she'd seen at Jake's table in the mornings now seemed to be watching the roads in and out of town. The way Betty made sure to mention that her husband kept a shotgun behind the counter. Jake was organizing a defense, and he was doing it quietly without making Emma feel like a burden. She caught him one evening as he was leaving the diner.
"Can I talk to you?"
she asked. They walked down the street together, away from the evening crowd gathering at the saloon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from the vulnerability of what she was about to say. "I'm afraid," she said finally. "Not just of Charlie. I'm afraid of staying in one place. I'm afraid of trusting people. I'm afraid that if I let myself hope this could work, it'll hurt even worse when it all falls apart." Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. The fading light caught the lines around his eyes, the gray in his stubble. He looked tired, but also solid, like a mountain that had weathered 1,000 storms. "I'm afraid of you," she whispered, the words coming out before she could stop them. Jake's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker across his face. Pain, maybe. Or understanding. He took a small step back, giving her space. "Then I'll earn it," he said quietly. "Your trust. However long it takes, I'll earn it." He held her gaze. "I'm not Charlie Bridger. I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to let anyone else hurt you either. You can believe that or not, but I'll keep proving it until you do." Emma felt her chest tighten. "How can you be so sure?" she asked. "You barely know me." Jake looked up at the darkening sky, then back at her. 3 years ago, I failed someone," he said. "Someone I was supposed to protect." His voice remained steady, but Emma heard the weight of old grief beneath it. "I was too slow, too confident, too sure I had time. I didn't. She died because I wasn't good enough." Emma's breath caught. "Jake, I'm sorry." He shook his head. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand. I don't make promises lightly anymore. I mean it with everything I have. I mean it enough that I'll die making sure it's true if that's what it takes." Emma stared at him, at this quiet man who had somehow decided her life was worth defending. She wanted to ask more questions, wanted to know about the person he'd lost, wanted to understand what drove him. But she also knew that some stories came with time, and Jake had already given her more than she'd expected. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Jake tipped his hat. "Get some rest, Emma. Tomorrow's another day." But tomorrow brought something Emma had been dreading. She was wiping down tables in the early morning when a stranger walked into the diner. He was tall and lean, with eyes that seemed to catalog everything in an instant. He wore dusty traveling clothes and a gun that looked well used. He sat down at a table and ordered coffee. Emma's hands shook as she poured it, and she saw him notice. His smile was cold. "New in town?" he asked. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. The stranger took a sip of coffee. "I'm looking for someone. Young woman, blonde hair, blue eyes. Pretty. Might be going by the name Emma Clark." Emma's blood turned to ice. Her real name.
"You knew her real name?"
She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Why are you looking for her?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady.
The stranger's smile widened. "Let's just say someone misses her very much."
"Someone who wants to talk to her, make things right." He leaned back in his chair. "You wouldn't happen to know where I might find her, would you?" Emma's mind raced. This was one of Charlie's men, a tracker. If she ran now, he'd know for sure it was her. If she stayed in pretended ignorance, maybe she could buy time. "Sounds like a personal matter," she said carefully. "I've only been here a few weeks myself. Haven't met everyone in town yet." The stranger studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Well, if you do happen to meet anyone matching that description, you might tell her that Charlie is a patient man, but his patience has limits, and when those limits run out, things get unpleasant for everyone involved." He stood up, dropping coins on the table. "Nice talking to you, miss." After he left, Emma collapsed into the nearest chair, her whole body shaking. Betty rushed over from the kitchen, her face creased with concern. "Emma, honey, what happened?" Before Emma could answer, the door burst open. Jake strode in, his expression grim. "Where is he?" he demanded. "Gone," Emma managed to say. "Rode west about 2 minutes ago." Jake cursed under his breath, something Emma had never heard him do before.
He came to her table and crouched down so they were eye level. "Did he threaten you?"
Emma shook her head. He was fishing, trying to see if I'd react. "But Jake, he knows I'm here. He described me perfectly. It's only a matter of time before he comes back with more men." Jake's jaw tightened. "Then we don't have much time." He stood up and called out to Betty. "Can you close early today? We need to have a town meeting." Betty didn't hesitate. "Consider it done." Within the hour, the diner was filled with townspeople. Emma recognized most of them by now. The sheriff, an older man named Bill Carter, the banker, Henry Morrison, several ranch hands from the surrounding properties, Betty and her husband Tom, the blacksmith, the storekeeper, even old Henry, who slept through most things. Jake stood at the front of the room, his voice calm but commanding. "Folks, we've got a situation. Miss Emma here is in trouble through no fault of her own. There are dangerous men looking for her, and they've tracked her to Dust Creek. Those men won't care who gets hurt while they're here. We have two choices. We can ask Emma to leave, send the trouble somewhere else, or we can stand together and make it clear that Dust Creek protects its own." Emma wanted to sink through the floor. This was exactly what she'd feared, being discussed like a problem to be solved. She started to stand up. "I'll go," she said. "I don't want anyone hurt because of me." Jake's voice cut through her protest. "She doesn't get a vote," he said firmly. "This is about what kind of town we want to be. Do we stand up to bullies, or do we let them dictate who can live here and who can't?" The room was silent for a moment. Then Sheriff Carter spoke up. "I've been sheriff here for 15 years, he said. "I've seen good people driven out by fear plenty of times. It never ends well. Fear just invites more fear." He looked at Emma. "I say she stays." One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Some were more enthusiastic than others, but in the end, the decision was unanimous. Emma would stay, and Dust Creek would stand with her. After the meeting, Emma found Jake outside, checking his rifle. She approached slowly, still processing what had just happened. "Why?" "Whew," she asked. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Jake didn't look up from his work. "Because it's right," he said simply. "And because everyone deserves a place where they can stop running." He finally met her eyes. "You've been running so long you forgot what it's like to have people on your side. Time you remembered." Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know how to repay this." Jake's expression softened. "Don't die," he said. "That'll be payment enough." He shouldered his rifle. "Now go get some rest. When they come, and they will come, I need you to have your wits about you." "Can you shoot?" Emma nodded. "My father taught me." "Good. Tomorrow I'll get you a rifle. You'll need to know how to use it, not just in theory, but for real." The next 2 days were spent in preparation. Jake taught Emma how to handle a Winchester rifle, how to reload quickly under pressure, how to stay calm when her heart was racing. He was patient but demanding, pushing her until her shoulders ached and her fingers were sore from working the lever. Other men were preparing too. Barricades were subtly reinforced. Sight lines were cleared. The town began to look like a fortress, though casual visitors wouldn't notice the changes. Jake had fought in battles before, Emma realized. He knew how to turn a town into a defensible position. On the third day, riders appeared on the horizon. Emma was upstairs in her room when Betty shouted the warning. She grabbed her rifle with hands that had steadied over the past few days and made her way downstairs. Jake was already in position near the window, his rifle resting easily in his hands. 5 men, he said quietly. That'll be Bridger and his tracker plus 3 more. He glanced at Emma. You ready? Emma nodded, surprised to find it was true. I'm ready. The riders came slowly, knowing they were expected. They stopped in the middle of the main street, their horses restless beneath them. The man in front was exactly as Emma remembered, Charlie Bridger, with his handsome face and cold, calculating eyes. He dismantled and looked around at the seemingly quiet town. Emma Clark, he called out. I know you're here. Come out and talk to me. We can settle this like civilized people. Jake stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. The lady doesn't want to talk to you, Bridger. Time for you to ride on. Charlie's smile was thin and dangerous. And who might you be, friend? I'm the man telling you to leave, Jake said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. You're not welcome in Dust Creek. Charlie laughed. That's not how this works, cowboy. The lady knows things she shouldn't know. She made a commitment to me, and then she broke it. I'm here to collect what's mine. She's not yours, Jake said flatly. She never was. And she's not leaving. So you have 2 choices. You can turn around and ride out, or you can try to take her. But I promise you, if you choose the second option, you won't live to regret it. Charlie's expression darkened. Big words from one man. That's where you're wrong, a voice called out. Sheriff Carter stepped out from the general store, his shotgun visible. Several other men appeared from various positions around the street. Within seconds, Charlie and his men were surrounded by armed townspeople. Charlie's confident expression faltered. He looked around, clearly recalculating. Emma watched from the window, her rifle trained on him, her heart pounding but her hands steady. This was the moment she'd been dreading for months, but now that it was here, she felt something unexpected. Not fear, but determination. She set down her rifle and walked to the door. Jake tried to stop her, but she gently moved past him. She stepped out onto the porch, facing Charlie across the dusty street. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Charlie, she said. Her voice rang out clear and strong. You made me think I was trapped, that I had no choices. But you were wrong. I have a choice, and I choose to stay here with people who actually care about what happens to me. Charlie's face twisted with rage. You belong to me, he snarled. You think these people will protect you? I'll burn this whole town to the ground if I have to. Then you'll die trying, Jake said quietly. He hadn't moved from his position, but there was something in his voice that made Charlie's hand twitch toward his gun. Don't, Jake continued. You're outgunned and outsmarted. Take your men and go, or I'll bury you in the street where you stand. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Emma could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every eye on the scene. Then Charlie's expression changed, becoming calculating again. This isn't over, he said, but he pulled his horse around. His men followed, clearly relieved to be leaving. They rode out of town at a gallop, dust rising behind them. The townspeople erupted in cheers, but Jake held up a hand for silence. He'll be back, Jake said. And next time he'll bring more men. We bought ourselves time, nothing more. But Emma felt something shift inside her. She had faced Charlie, had stood up to him, and the world hadn't ended. Jake had been right. She was stronger than she'd thought. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Charlie or his men. The town gradually relaxed, though Jake kept up regular patrols. Emma continued working at the diner, but now she walked through town without constantly looking over her shoulder. She smiled more easily, laughed at Betty's jokes, and started to think about the future instead of just surviving the present. She and Jake had fallen into an easy rhythm. He still came in for breakfast every morning, still sat at his corner table, but now they talked. Real conversations about everything and nothing. Emma learned that Jake had been a soldier before becoming a cowboy, that he'd lost his wife to fever during the war, that the person he'd failed to protect had been his younger brother. I was supposed to watch him, Jake had said one morning, staring into his coffee. We were ambushed, and I made a call that got him killed. I've been trying to make up for it ever since. Emma had reached across the table and touched his hand. You can't make up for the past, she'd said gently. You can only try to do better in the future. And Jake, you've saved me. Not just from Charlie, but from myself. You helped me remember how to hope. Jake had turned his hand over, his rough palm against hers. You did that yourself, he'd said. I just gave you the space to do it. That night, as Emma was closing up the diner, she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses moving fast. Her heart sank. She ran to the window and felt her blood turn to ice. At least 20 riders, all armed, all heading straight for Dust Creek. Charlie had kept his promise. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside. Jake was already in the street, along with Sheriff Carter and several other men, but 20 against maybe a dozen was bad odds, no matter how determined they were. Jake saw her, and his expression hardened. "Get inside, Emma. Bar the doors." "No," Emma said. "This is because of me. I'm not hiding while people die for me." Jake strode over to her, his face closer to anger than she'd ever seen it. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "If anything happens to you, they win. You need to survive this, Emma. You need to live. Promise me." Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't lose you," she said. "Not now. Not when I've finally found something worth fighting for." Jake's expression softened for just a moment. "Then I'll make sure you don't," he said. "But you need to trust me." "Please." Before Emma could respond, Charlie's voice rang out across the town. "Last chance, Emma. Come out now or we burn everything." Jake pulled Emma close for just a second, so quick she barely had time to register it. Then he let her go and turned to face the approaching riders. Sheriff Carter moved to stand beside him, then Tom from the diner, then Henry Morrison, then a dozen others, the entire town standing together. Emma realized they weren't going to win this fight. There were too many men, too many guns. Charlie had brought enough force to overwhelm them completely. This wasn't going to end with him riding away again. This was going to end in blood. But then she heard something that made her heart leap. More horses, coming from the other direction. She turned and saw riders streaming into town from the east. 20, 30, maybe more. Ranch hands from the surrounding properties, men from neighboring towns, all armed and ready. Jake must have sent word, must have called in favors, must have known Charlie would come back with more men. He'd been preparing for this all along, building a network of support that went far beyond Dust Creek. Charlie's confident expression crumbled as he realized he was now outnumbered 2-1. His men shifted nervously, looking to him for orders. But Jake didn't give him time to think. "Last chance, Bridger," Jake called out. "You leave now, or you answer to everyone here, and I guarantee you won't make it out alive." Charlie's face contorted with rage. He reached for his gun, but before he could clear the holster, Jake's rifle cracked. The gun flew from Charlie's hand, his fingers bleeding. Several of Charlie's men immediately raised their hands in surrender. Others wheeled their horses around and fled. Charlie sat on his horse, cradling his injured hand, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. "You'll regret this," he spat. "I doubt it," Jake said calmly. He walked forward until he was standing right beside Charlie's horse. "You're done, Bridger. The Carlton gang's days are numbered, and everyone knows it. The marshals have been tracking you for months, and I sent them everything Emma knew about your operation. You're wanted in 3 territories, and now everyone here is a witness to you threatening innocent people. You've got nowhere left to run." Charlie's face went pale. Emma stepped forward, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "You're the one who's trapped now, Charlie," she said. "You're the one who should be afraid. And I'm not afraid of you anymore." Sheriff Carter moved forward with rope. "Charlie Bridger, you're under arrest for attempted murder, extortion, and about a dozen other charges." His men quickly tied Charlie's hands while several others rounded up the remaining gang members who hadn't fled. As Charlie was led away, still shouting threats, Emma felt the strength go out of her legs. She sat down hard on the porch steps, her rifle clattering beside her. It was over. It was really over. Jake came and sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded, then shook her head, then laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "I don't know," she admitted. "I spent so long being afraid, and now I don't know what to do without it." Jake was quiet for a moment. "You live," he said simply. "You make friends, you work, you find things that make you happy. You let yourself be part of something bigger than just survival." Emma looked at him, at this quiet man who had changed everything. "And what about you?" she asked. "What do you want?" Jake met her eyes, and for the first time Emma saw vulnerability there. "I want you to stay," he said, "here in Dust Creek. I want you to trust me eventually when you're ready. I want to see you smile without that shadow of fear behind it." His voice dropped lower. "And someday, if you'll let me, I want to be the person who makes you feel safe enough to take off that armor you're wearing and just be yourself." Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but for the first time in forever, they weren't tears of fear. They were something else entirely. "I'm still afraid," she whispered, "not of Charlie anymore, but of this. Of letting someone in. Of trusting someone that much." Jake reached over and gently wiped away a tear with his thumb. "Then I'll earn it," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken weeks ago. However long it takes, I'll prove to you that you're safe with me, that you matter. That you're worth protecting, not because you need protecting, but because you're you. Emma took a shaky breath. What if I'm broken? She asked. What if I can't ever be the person you think I am? Jake smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Then we'll be broken together, he said. I never claimed to be perfect, Emma. I've got my own scars, my own fears, but I figure two people with cracks might just fit together better than two people who think they're whole. Emma found herself smiling back despite her tears. That's possibly the worst metaphor I've ever heard, she said. Yeah, Jake admitted. I'm not much of a poet. He stood up and offered her his hand. Come on. Betty's probably got coffee going, and the whole town's going to want to celebrate. Emma took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. As they walked toward the diner, surrounded by townspeople who had fought for her, had stood with her, had chosen to protect her even when it put them at risk, Emma felt something unfamiliar settling in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it. It was peace. Not perfect, not complete, still mixed with uncertainty and fear and all the complicated emotions that came with being human. But it was there, fragile and precious and real. She squeezed Jake's hand and he squeezed back, and Emma thought that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found what she'd been running toward all along. Not safety, because that was always an illusion. Not a place where nothing bad could happen, because those didn't exist, but a place where people cared enough to stand together when bad things came. Where she wasn't alone anymore. Where she was improbably and wonderfully home. The celebration at the diner lasted until well after dark. Emma moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and thanks, still trying to process everything that had happened. Jake stayed close but not smothering, always nearby if she needed him, but giving her space to breathe. As the crowd finally began to thin out, Emma found herself on the porch again, looking up at the stars. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without looking that it was Jake. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last few townspeople make their way home. Finally, Emma spoke. When you said you'd earn my trust, she said slowly, I don't think you understand that you already have. Jake turned to look at her, surprise evident on his face.
Emma?
I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about being broken together. And I realized something. I've been so focused on my fear, on protecting myself, that I didn't notice when I started feeling safe, when I started trusting you. Not because you pushed for it, but because you never did. Jake didn't say anything, but she could see the hope in his eyes tempered by caution. She continued, I'm still scared. I'm probably going to be scared for a long time. But I'm also tired of letting fear make my decisions, so I'm making a different choice. What choice is that? Jake asked quietly. Emma stepped closer to him. I'm choosing to stay. Not just in Dust Creek, but here, with you. I'm choosing to see what happens when I let someone in, when I trust someone enough to show them all the broken parts and believe they won't run away. Jake reached up and gently cupped her face with his hand. I won't run, he said. His voice was steady, certain. I've been running from my own ghosts for too long. Maybe it's time we both stopped. Emma leaned into his touch, letting herself feel the warmth of his hand, the solidity of his presence. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. She knew that. There would still be hard days ahead. Charlie would go to trial, and she'd have to testify. There would be nightmares and moments of doubt. She and Jake would have to learn each other's rough edges, would have arguments and misunderstandings like any two people trying to build something together. But for the first time, Emma believed they could handle it. Not because everything would be perfect, but because they'd already proven they could face the hard things and come through on the other side. Jake, she said softly, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself. Jake smiled, that small, genuine smile she'd come to treasure. Thank you for giving me a reason to stop running too, he said, for reminding me that the past doesn't have to define the future. Emma rose up on her toes and kissed him, soft and tentative and full of promise. Jake kissed her back, gentle and careful like she was something precious. When they pulled apart, Emma was smiling through fresh tears. I'm still going to be afraid sometimes, she warned him. I know, Jake said, but you won't be afraid alone. And Emma? I'm going to be afraid sometimes too. That's just being human. But we'll figure it out together. Emma nodded, leaning her head against his chest and feeling his arms come around her. In the distance, she could hear music starting up at the saloon. Someone playing a fiddle badly but enthusiastically. Dogs barked somewhere down the street. A child laughed from one of the nearby houses, the ordinary sounds of a town settling down for the night. It was perfect in its imperfection, and Emma let herself feel it fully, the warmth of Jake's embrace. The cool night air on her face, the solid wood of the porch beneath her feet, the smell of dust and horses and Betty's cooking drifting from the diner. This was real. This was hers. This was home. They stood there together as the stars wheeled overhead. Two broken people who had found each other in a dusty little town that had decided to stand up against the darkness. They had a long way to go, both of them, but they weren't traveling alone anymore. And that, Emma thought, made all the difference. Tomorrow she'd wake up in Dust Creek. She'd pour coffee at the diner. She'd smile at neighbors who'd fought for her, who'd chosen her as one of their own. She'd practice with her rifle because the world was still dangerous and being prepared mattered. She'd sit across from Jake at his corner table and talk about everything and nothing. And she'd do it all without looking over her shoulder, without planning her next escape, without the constant weight of fear pressing down on her chest. She'd do it as someone who belonged somewhere, as someone who was choosing to build a life instead of just surviving, as someone who had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do wasn't to keep running, but to stand still and let yourself be found. Jake pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Ready to head inside?" he asked. "It's getting late." Emma pulled back just enough to look up at him, and in his eyes she saw everything she needed. Patience and strength and quiet certainty. The promise of tomorrow and the day after that and all the days beyond. Not perfection, but something better. Something real. "Yeah," she said, smiling. "I'm ready." They walked inside together, leaving the door open behind them to let in the cool night air. Betty had left a lamp burning low, casting warm light across the simple wooden tables and worn floorboards. It wasn't fancy, but it was exactly what Emma needed it to be. Jake picked up his hat from the table where he'd left it earlier. "I'll see you tomorrow," he asked. "Same time?" Emma nodded. "Same time," she confirmed. "And Jake?" She waited until he turned back to look at her. "I'm glad I stayed." Jake's smile was worth more than all the pretty words in the world. "Me too," he said simply. "Me too." After he left, Emma stood in the empty diner for a moment, just breathing. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was still there. She could feel it lurking in the shadows of her mind. But it was smaller now, manageable, just one part of who she was instead of the thing that defined her. She thought about Charlie, locked up and waiting for trial. She thought about the Carlton gang, scattered and broken. She thought about all the miles she'd run, all the nights she'd spent terrified and alone. And she thought about how different things could have been if she'd given up just one day sooner, if she'd never made it to Dust Creek, if she'd never sat down at that counter and ordered coffee for Betty. But she had made it. She'd survived long enough to find this place, these people, this quiet cowboy who had somehow seen past her fear to the person she could become. And that mattered. It mattered more than all the bad things that had led her here. Emma turned down the lamp and headed upstairs to her room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new uncertainties, new reasons to be afraid, but it would also bring new reasons to hope, to smile, to believe that she deserved good things. It would bring Jake's steady presence and Betty's warm kindness and the knowledge that she was part of something bigger than herself. As she lay in bed, listening to the sounds of Dust Creek settling down for the night, Emma let herself imagine the future. Not the frightening, uncertain future she'd been running from, but a real future with possibilities and choices. A future where she wasn't defined by what Charlie had done to her or the fear he'd planted in her heart. A future where she could be whoever she decided to be. She imagined years passing in this town, learning every person's name, every story, becoming woven into the fabric of the community. She imagined seasons changing, watching spring flowers give way to summer heat, autumn colors, winter snows. She imagined holidays spent at Betty's table, surrounded by friends who'd become family, and she imagined Jake, steady and patient, earning her trust one day at a time until she couldn't remember why she'd ever been afraid to let him in. She imagined learning all his stories, all his scars, all the ways he was broken and whole at the same time. She imagined building something together, something solid and real and worth protecting. It wasn't a fantasy. Emma knew herself well enough to know that. There would be setbacks and struggles. Days when the fear would come roaring back and she'd want to run again. Days when trusting Jake would feel impossible, when opening her heart would seem like the most dangerous thing in the world. Days when the past would reach out with cold fingers and remind her of everything she'd survived. But there would also be good days. Days of laughter and sunshine and simple pleasures. Days when she'd catch herself smiling for no reason. Days when Jake's hand in hers would feel like the most natural thing in the world. Days when she'd look around at the life she'd built and feel nothing but gratitude for having the courage to stop running. Emma closed her eyes, feeling exhaustion finally catching up with her. Tomorrow, she'd start figuring out what came next. Tonight, she'd just rest, safe in the knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be. In the room below, the floorboards creaked as Betty made her final rounds before heading to bed. Outside, the wind rustled through the cottonwood trees that lined the main street. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. The sounds of home, ordinary and beautiful and real. Emma pulled the blanket up to her chin and let herself drift off to sleep. Her last thought before darkness claimed her a simple one. She was home. Finally, impossibly, wonderfully home. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over Dust Creek, she'd still be here, ready to face whatever came next. Not alone, not anymore, but surrounded by people who'd proven they'd stand with her when it mattered most. The fear might never completely go away, but that was okay. She was learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was being afraid and choosing to move forward anyway. It was opening your heart even when it had been broken before. It was trusting someone to catch you when you fell. It was believing, against all evidence to the contrary, that good things could last. And as Emma drifted off to sleep in her small room above the diner, in a dusty town that had become her sanctuary, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. She'd stopped running. She'd let herself be found. She'd chosen hope over fear, trust over suspicion, love over safety. It was terrifying and exhilarating and more real than anything she'd felt in years, and it was just the beginning.